Welcome back to the channel, everybody. We are in Wilmington, California, just south of Los Angeles, at the Barracks Civil War Museum today for the Civil War Technology Fair. Let's check it out. So this was the U.S. Army headquarters for the Southern California and Arizona Territory from 1862 to 1871. It's a museum. It has some hardtack.
On the Civil War, okay, it must be. Yeah. Better.
Seriously, otherwise they were all terrible. Like the sacrifice.
This one a little bit more love. Yes.
Cool tin type.
Right. All of our soldiers are. This is period magic lantern. These are all period magic lantern flyers. It's all hand painted on glass. Okay. First animation. Animation and shows. There were all kinds of shows, comedy shows, learning shows. So what I've been doing is crazy.
A little bit. Yeah. But they've got a great guy.
Some old-timey photography.
What? Starting it. Okay, that's a good question. Very good. We're going to put white dividers.
Well, it's kind of like, well, there they used to went to Ireland. Same thing. Where that store. Yeah, I didn't know I wasn't going to be able to get here.
Oh, the portrait's not here. Is that why we couldn't find it?
That billow is ginormous.
Is he a kid?
Well, for years.
You're a kid, you can take a shot.
John, you can take one of these.
Tell me you're a kid. I didn't ask Aaron.
Sorry.
Leavenworth is your total prison town. There's the military prison.
Let's go get a picture over here.
Federal prison.
He's not a kid, he's got a mustache.
He had a guy.
Think. I'm going to say the word.
Fire.
Huh?
Why do you need a picture?
Make the metal hot so I can move it without breaking it.
Are you a kid?
Stand over here, right over here by Odin. Okay, look, now it's nice and hot.
It's not sharp.
You have a metal bending now?
Do you make these little things?
No, we didn't make them. We just got them so you'd have something to take home. If you're a kid, you can take a turn.
Can I borrow that for a moment, sir?
You may indeed. You're not a kid. I'm not a kid either, but I have when I feel like a kid when I get to play with it.
Yeah, there you go. You got it?
Stories. Starts appearing to her and talking to her about the story, about the different murders and all that. So, kind of very interesting.
I saw the PDF.
You like to go so much you bought the book.
Because I like history. And the writer
Oh, I'm glad to hear you say something good about it.
actually wrote
Hello.
How are you today?
All right. Anything I can answer a question for?
Are these like reusable or is it a one-time only?
When you're talking reusable as far as the projectiles, is that what you're?
Yeah, could they be salvaged and reused or?
No, they blow up.
Oh, okay.
Generally, you know, a solid shot. I don't know if you could do that with a solid shot, but they didn't bother to do it. Right. But yeah, this blows up and turns into stuff like this.
Oh, there's balls in there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this is what's called case shot or shrapnel. This is spherical. This is for a smooth pound cannon, smooth bore cannon rather. And then these kind of projectiles here are for a rifle cannon. So you'd have this would like blow up like that.
And how much do those weigh?
The ones for this size of the cannon here are 10 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how far could they travel?
Well, if I were to just shoot it to see as far as it could go maybe up to 3 miles.
Wow.
Our effective range, we say, would be mile and a half, because you have to visually be able to see whatever you're shooting at.
And is it all math? It's just the trajectory and you figure out where you're going to go, or?
Yeah, we have a chart inside of our window. That's the window there. You open that up, there's a chart in there, and it'll tell you where to cut the fuse for the number of seconds that you want it. You cut the fuse for that kind, set the fuse for another kind called a Borman fuse, where it's a dial and you punch a hole in it for the number of seconds for it to burn. And
Now on the battlefield, how do you know how far it is? Are you estimating?
estimate.
Okay.
So
I guess after a while you get pretty good at it.
yeah, they
Yeah.
get used to estimating. Yeah, these pieces here, these are actual Civil War
Oh wow.
period projectiles. They have some reproductions over there.
How long you been doing this for?
I've been doing it for 13 years.
Okay. What got you into it?
Just a general interest in history and particularly the Civil War. Was studying it, got into reading about it, and so I kind of just worked my way into it.
Awesome. What's your name?
Chris Anderson.
Nice to meet you.
Me too.
Your wound has to be a result of enemy action. But technically, if you were hit by friendly fire,
Destroy shell fragment and eye.
what would the one with the eggshell?
That's right. Shell fragment and eye.
Yes, sir.
What are you making?
A pair of tongs,
Okay.
small tongs to grab embers out of a fire and light a pipe.
How long does it usually take from beginning to end?
Oh, doing it this way, maybe an hour or so. Just
Oh, really?
Talking, but if you just focus on doing it,
If we were bothering
30
you?
minutes,
Yeah. I'm sorry, how long?
20 or 30
Oh,
minutes.
okay.
Something this simple, because there's no extra twists or anything. Sometimes you'll
make it out of square stock, and you twist and counter twist, so when the tongs come together, you've got twists that are opposite of each other. That takes a little longer.
Bellows, the cooling wire.
What's your forging?
What's that?
What you making? What you forging?
A pair of tongs.
That was a trick question.
On the Perry Avenue side in 2 minutes.
Hi, Terry. Say hi to my buddy Matt. Yeah. Hi. Lisa's over
I
here.
saw, but I didn't get to say it. Thanks for coming.
Although we do.
Okay, yeah. I can't wait to talk about it.
There's going to be a horse demonstration and discussion in the front of the house in 1 minute. Make your way towards the front of the house.
In the Fresno Valley, and you can see what a Chinese.
I got to be in the parade. It was wonderful.
It's a chemical reaction.
Yes.
How cool. How cool.
The
For the cavalry demonstration? Yeah, right away. There. Thank you.
Is that a transient there in the door, right?
Yeah, we're gonna let him stay.
Is that a hobo? Is that a hobo? Here, I got her.
How's everyone doing?
Great.
Good. Glad to hear it. Welcome to the Drum Barracks Civil War Museum. It is a technology day today here at the Drum Barracks. And that being the case, we are going to talk about the latest and greatest firearms, small arms, that the cavalry used during the American Civil War. My name is Brian. I am with the 7th Michigan, nominally, for the day at least. And what I'm holding is a Sharps carbine. And this was first developed in the 1840s from the Sharps rifle. The difference between a rifle and a carbine really is this: a carbine was a smaller, more lightweight version. So this has, for example, a 22-inch barrel, 39 inches overall length, where rifles might have 40-inch length overall. So, Sharps carbine, this is a single shot weapon. This would have been, like I said, the state of art during the American Civil War, and very common for the U.S. and the Confederate cavalries both to use this weapon. There were more than this weapon. This carbine was most prevalent during the American Civil War on both sides. You had others. You had the Burnside, you had the Merritt, you had the Star, the Burnside, and a couple others. But in terms of production, there were more of these than any else. By the end of the war, they produced about 77 to 90,000 of these. This is what's called a breech-loading weapon. If you've ever seen a muzzle-loading weapon used during the American Civil War, like a 1861 Springfield, what you'll notice is the soldier puts the charge, the powder, down the barrel, down the muzzle of the weapon, followed by the bullet, and they'll tamp that down using their ramrod. This is a breech-loading weapon, so a preloaded paper cartridge and mini ball would go into the breech of this weapon. And the breech is what's called a falling block, also a knife edge falling block. And all that is a steel block that moves within the rifle itself, and it has sort of a knife edge to it, and that some people call it a cigar cutter that sort of trimmed off the edge of that paper cartridge. Could be paper, could be linen, but again, it was also used the same sort of mini ball that you would have seen with the infantry's 61 Springfield. This is what a mini ball looks like. Just a lead ball with a concave side to it. And this weapon here was rifle. Rifling was a new technology in the middle of the 19th century. And what that means is along the length and inside the barrel of this weapon, there are 6 grooves that twist sideways. And so when this weapon was fired, the skirts of that mini ball would expand, they'd catch that groove, that entire bullet would rotate, it would spin, and it gave the weapon more accuracy and more range. This weapon was effective to about 500 yards, whereas the Springfield that the infantry was using effectively 200-300 yards or so. Again, it's breech loading, and it had a paper or linen cartridge. Metal cartridges came out towards the end of the war and into what was called the Indian Wars later in the 19th century. And it was fired using a percussion cap, fulminate cap, that fit on the nipple of this, underneath this hammer right here. And the hammer would ignite that percussion cap, and that would ignite the charge in the cartridge in the barrel. What else can I tell you about this weapon? Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Are you saying they didn't have to rip off
That
the
is
paper?
correct. So you've seen, maybe you've seen a reenactment or movies. Again, infantry using something like an 1861 Springfield. They bit off the end of that cartridge to expose the loose powder. They poured the loose powder down, then the ball, they would ram it. This, you just loaded the cartridge into the breech area. It was a preloaded paper or linen cartridge. Some of the technological advantages of this weapon were that, among other things, if you were out of cartridges, but you had loose powder and balls, you could load it that way as well. So, again, carbine shorter, more suited to the movements of a cavalry trooper. It was more versatile in that I could load, shoot, aim, use this weapon from a prone position, kneeling position. And so it was more versatile in terms of how I could use the weapon. Cavalry often fought dismounted. In other words, we might travel to the field of battle, we would all dismount, a man would hold 4 of the mounts at a time, and we would fight again using something like this. I also, as you see, a saber, and I have a sidearm, I have a Colt revolver. Any other questions? Oh, absolutely. This is Smoke. She's a quarter horse mare, and behind Smoke is Trinity, a thoroughbred gelding. And behind both of them is the formidable Sergeant Smith, who's going to tell you a little bit more about technology in the Civil War.
Good job. Good job. So one thing I'd like to clarify, I don't know if you caught it or not, when Brian talked about ranges on the weapons, he said the infantry rifle went 200 to 300 yards. What he meant was it was good 200 to 300 yards beyond the distance of the carbine. Okay. There were several battles during the American Civil War where cavalry, dismounted cavalry, came up against entrenched infantry. It's very difficult for cavalry to make that fight with the shorter weapons because they could not reach out and touch like the rifle did. This is the Spencer. The Spencer actually came along just prior to the Civil War, but he made a rifle that was awkward to carry on horseback. However, the 5th Michigan was armed with Spencer rifles. The Verdans, the famous Civil War sharpshooter unit, carried Spencer rifles. But the 5th Michigan was mustered as mounted infantry. They were not mustered as cavalry. Later on during the war, they were issued sabers. They were trained how to use the sabers. They kept their rifles, but they were used as cavalry. By 1863, after the Battle of Gettysburg, toward the end, just about all Union cavalry had the Spencer carbine. Instead of one shot at a time, this has a magazine in the stock that holds 7 rounds. This is a repeater. The cartridges are now copper. They're no longer linen or paper. The back of this stock opens. Bullets are inserted in the back. This is spring loaded to keep tension on the rounds. Weapon is cocked and that feeds a round up into the chamber. You pull the hammer back, you no longer need to put a firing cap on because the rounds have a primer built into them. You fire this, you cycle it, that kicks your old round out and feeds a new one in. This held 7 shots. This was the Yankee gun. The Confederates said you could load on Sunday and shoot all week. Tremendously improving your rate of firepower. The Sharps could fire 3 times faster than the musket, and this could fire 3 times faster than Spencer, or the Sharps. Ammunition carrying was done in a Blakesley cartridge box. It was no longer the box on the back of the belt. These came in different configurations with 4, 6, and 8 tubes. These tubes would be preloaded with your bullets. Take this out, pour your bullets in, and get back in the fight. You can see by the action very close to the Winchester. Maybe you remember seeing Winchesters on TV. The Winchester, the very first Winchesters, the Henry. The Henry was initially issued to infantry troops. There were only 2 cavalry units through the entire Civil War that got Henrys. Henry was, again, a longer barreled weapon and was awkward to use on horseback. At the beginning of the American Civil War, cavalry was recruited and pushed as the very romantic branch of the military. Man on horseback, riding into battle, swinging a saber. It was all very gallant. Okay? It also was extremely bloody and a high mortality rate. Horses and men are very susceptible to lead bullets flying around about 800-900 feet per second. Tactics were developed. John Buford was one of the predecessors of this and one of the proponents of this, where cavalry started to use the horses to get to where they needed to go and dismount and fight. Every 4th man, when you stand in your line, you count off by 4s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. Every 4th man was designated as a horse holder. 1, 2, and 3 would dismount. This is a link strap. She's not wearing hers. This is a link strap, and the horses would be linked together. The number 3 man would take his lead strap that Brian is holding here and would hand it to the number 4 man who stays mounted. The number 4 man turns, goes to the rear, takes the first 3 horses with him. Now you're going to lose a quarter of your manpower in every battle. Somebody to hold the horses. But with the increased rates of firepower, it tended to make up for that loss. This weapon was not used by the Confederacy. The Confederacy did not have the manufacturing capabilities to put this together. They tried to build it. They built it with a brass frame. It was very unsuccessful. If you're a Confederate trooper, you picked one of these up in the field. You also had to depend on Uncle Sam to supply you with ammunition. Uncle Sam was pretty good at doing that. The United States government was actually the greatest supplier of equipment to the Confederacy. But there was a battle that occurred down in Georgia when these were first issued on Sherman's March to the Sea, where there was a crossing on a river that the Confederates knew the Union had to go through. And they set up an ambush. The Union cavalry got there first. They looked at the ford. They said, you know what, this is a perfect place for an ambush. And what they did, they took a squad of soldiers. They stripped down to their long johns. They took their Spencers, because a metallic cartridge, now it's waterproof. You don't have to worry about your cartridge getting wet. And they forded the stream in their long johns. They said their kepis actually floated on the surface of the water. That was about the depth of the river. The Confederates said, we got them. Their weapons are underwater. The powder's going to be wet. The men came up out of the fort. The Confederates opened fire. The men fired back. They just poured the water out of the barrels, went into action, and chased away the Confederate ambush. Very, very effective. After the war, the weapon was taken out on the plains of America to fight Indians with, and the distances that you fought Indians didn't have enough oomph, and the military went back to a larger caliber weapon, the 45-70 Springfield carbine. Again, back to a single shot weapon, loaded one round at a time, because Sherman said the men would take more caution aiming and firing instead of having a rapid fire weapon, and they would waste ammunition. Custer probably had something to say about that, but he didn't survive to give a review on that. You've been great. Do you have any questions? This technology just shows the advancements in tactics and weapons for the cavalry during the Civil War. In the spirit of the technology fair, that's what we geared our talk toward. If you have any other questions, yes, ma'am.
So, you think about a cavalry charge. So are you saying that in the Civil War, the cavalry charge wouldn't work because of the long rifles that they had?
Not that it didn't work. It was just extremely costly in men and horses.
Okay.
The life of a Union horse during the Civil War was 6 months. Okay, 1.5 million were used up during the Civil War. Okay, they're just as susceptible to bullets as we are. Okay, and horses are expensive, and horses need to be trained, and riders need to be trained, and it's a lot to lose when you lose a horse, rider, and or both. Horses died 3 times at the rate of men did. So now the tactic became get to the battlefield, dismount, and go forward on foot. You might have a company or two that you'd have in reserve. You'd leave them mounted to attack the flanks while you were busy attacking the front with your dismounted cavalry. Okay? Yes, sir.
Did the farriers have mobile forges, or did they travel along with the army?
Yes, the Army had quite the train that followed them. They even brought feed. But before a campaign started, before a scout started, before a patrol started, you were issued 2 shoes. They were fit to your horse, a fore and a hind, and you were issued the nails. The farrier carried the file, the nippers, and the hammer. If your horse threw a shoe, you pulled out of ranks and waited for the farrier to come along. He was the auto club. He'd fix your flat, and off you'd go.
What about any veterinary care for all these animals?
In 1863, all right, he asked, okay? I have a bad habit. You ask me what time it is, I'll tell you how to build a watch. In 1863, the consumption in horses and the cost of horses was so high for the Union Army that they sat down and they said, we got to do something about this. And they formed the Cavalry Bureau. The Cavalry Bureau also included veterinary hospitals, the largest of which was in Geesboro, Washington, and I don't remember how many thousands of horses it would hold. But for the first time, horses were getting veterinary care. Company officers were no longer given the discretion of condemning an animal. It had to be a veterinarian that condemned the animal. Animals were the first time sent back behind the lines to these hospitals to be rehabilitated instead of just shot in the field. And many were just shot in the field. They weren't necessarily used up, but they were used up at the moment. And the theory was, if that horse is going to recover, some guy in gray could get on that and come attack me with it. Horses were taken off of farms. Horses were taken, there's one story, Southern women were in church. All their buggies were tied up out in front of the church on a Sunday. They come out after church. The buggies were there, but all the horses were gone. A Union patrol had come through and taken all the horses. Very, very valuable. Started off about $125, $125 per horse. Were sold for over $200 a piece by the end of the war. So yes, veterinary medicine was brought in, rehabilitation of horses. And you may wonder, okay, you've got a company and half your men are dismounted. Now what do I do? You actually sent a squad. You went to the nearest remount station. You get whatever horses you need. They were issued to that squad, and they herded them back to where your company was waiting for you. By the way, Does anybody know the definition of an Army remount? An Army remount is a horse that's been ridden once. So these guys are even breaking their own horses. Wow. Any other questions? That's a good question, thank you. Very few people even think about veterinary care.
How about culinary care for dead horses?
You know, I have not found an instance during the Civil War where horses were eaten.
Really?
Yeah, not during Indian Wars, different game. Out on the prairie, miles away from supply. But during the Civil War, I have not, and I've looked, I have not found where the troopers ate horse flesh. Yeah. Yes, sir.
When you say they would break their own horses, what do you mean by that?
Train them.
Oh, train them.
I'm sorry. Train the horse. So I would change. In other words, this thing has to be taught everything. From how to lead and tie, to be ridden, to be handled in the field, to now be handled in combat. Okay? And a lot of them didn't do well. They ran the other way, they ran into enemy lines, they reared up, flipped over. In my experience training horses to gunfire, some of them just won't do it. It's like, dude, this is not in my contract. And you have to do it carefully. I'm sure then it was baptism by fire. These horses were brought out, and you got to think there's artillery going off, there's artillery incoming, small arms fire. I'm sure it was quite the mess. And the officers had first pick of the horses, and they'd pick a guy who could kind of cowboy up, and they say, here, you ride this the first couple battles, and then I'll ride it.
You said the Confederates were getting supplies from
The U.S. government was the biggest supplier to the Confederate Army.
For reacquisition.
Yeah, soldiers dropping weapons, camps getting overrun, supply trains being captured. The Confederate cavalry was very, very effective up till 1863, as the Union Army was kind of getting its feet underneath of it. But then about that time, even the Confederates remarked, we always knew the Yankees could fight, but now they can ride and fight. And Jeb Stuart and who's one, South Carolina, Hampton, they pretty much ran circles around the Union Army. They ran around McClellan's army twice, and just picking up supplies. They showed up in places they weren't expected to be. They'd take camps. They'd take generals' coats just for fun, to embarrass them. And they were very, very effective at gleaning supplies off the Union Army. Confederate soldier brought his own horse into battle. Confederate Army didn't supply horses. You were paid a stipend if your horse was killed in battle, but if your horse died from disease while in service, you got nothing. If your horse died in battle, you had 6 months to go home and come back with another horse. Most Confederate cavalrymen who went back home never showed back up again. If you couldn't find a horse in 6 months, you had to report to the infantry. Anything else? Thank you very, very much for your time. We'll have the horses back out front later on. You can pet them, touch them. Matter of fact, even, you okay with it right now? Yeah, you want to come down and pet them. Stick to this area. Okay, horses are vegetarians. They will bite your finger off, but the good thing is they'll spit it back out so you got it sewn back on. So let's just avoid the mouth. But feel free to pet them. Trinity is a grandson of Seattle Slew. He's a full thoroughbred. Yeah. Yeah. He couldn't run, so here he is. Now he's fighting the Confederates.
Don't let it run, it'll burn your skin. It's just enough to saturate the hold it over their nose about 2 to 4 inches above it as they're breathing regular air. About 20 minutes. Breathing this also, they're out. They learn on-the-job training. So new, within medical school. They learn how to do this. If you know on-the-job training what it means, you'll lost some of them to play the game. I should don't know. So, 20 minutes for that. You start doing the surgery. If it'll wiggle out, fine. If it's stuck in a bone, you've got an arrowhead forceps. Let me show you this other. Pretend I've been shot. The surgeon would come in, clamp it on, push it along, shove it inside. Here's what happened inside. Go till you hit the back of the arrow, open it up, go around.
Then pull. Oh, crazy.
Sometimes that bone would be stuck in there so bad. One surgeon was up on his knees on the operating table, whatever it was. I'm not going to top of that. I'll be like him. Pulled that so hard back, he fell into the arms of the hospital steward and back up. That was nice and strong. It did the job. Prior to this, you'd have a metal ring with a little rope string on it. Take a probe and try to push it around the end of the arrowhead and pull it out. What if it's stuck into the bone? Now you've got to separate tissue and cut that thing out. That's bad during the Civil War because they don't know what causes gangrene. They don't know it's germs. So the more you cut, you add more organisms into it, their chances to make it worse and worse. So on this guy, clamp onto him. He's asleep already. We took care of that. Clamp on, shove it in, hit the back, grab that arrowhead, pull it out, and stick a finger in there.
Oh God!
You know why you do that?
Stop bleeding.
That's good, but during that time, there's no X-ray machine. During the Civil, there's no X-ray machine. The finger's a great probe. Unfortunately, it's dirty. They don't know that matters a hell of beans. They stick it down, feel around. Oh, it's just a crack bone. Sew them up, send them back to the crew break, and get them back out in the field. But if I feel in there, like sometime it'll, like a bullet, like this, hits the bone, shatters it. That during the Civil War, that's not repairable. They can't make, a plate in there and put screws. That's totally in the next century. They can't do any of that kind of work. So you have to cut it off. Pretend that's something that happened. I'd have the tourniquet on. I've got a razor sharp knife. Cut the tissue to the bone.
Oh wow!
If I'm lucky enough to have it, if I have an assistant to brace the upper leg, do that, and then I'll peel back the tissue.
Bone saw.
Yep. I called it a capital saw. Cut it. Throw it off here and then throw it out. No crap. Would you throw me my? You gotta see the new football. Good lateral. Good lateral.
Good theatrics.
The next thing, and this is what took most of the time. The operations usually took about a half hour, no matter what it was. That was the only time. That was just the amount of time per patient.
Okay.
Way too many patients. So it's a matter of kind of fix them in a half hour. I can't. If I can't, morphine. I'm glad that you die. Yeah, they helped them die back then. Yeah. So in this, pretend I cut it across. That looks like hamburger with ketchup on it. You can't see it. But they knew back then if I take this tool called a 10-knife and kind of like a curved blade with a handle on it, release the tourniquet, it'll start spurting blood. I can reach in there and tease it out. Can you see that artery right there?
Yeah.
There's about a half dozen on a typical person's knee area. Tie those off.
Like literally?
Just tie it off. Prior to the Civil War, cauterize it, burn it.
That's what I was going to say, cauterize it.
If you go back to Roman Greek times, this changed every 50, 20 years, every 100 years. So back and forth. They didn't know which way to go. Remember, there's no clinical trial companies out there to test ideas the way it should be tested.
What's this?
You have 3 patients, you do something for.
They're just like, most of them didn't die, so what would you go this way?
Yeah, they'll say, hey, I did that. I did something right. I did that. Maybe you didn't. Sometimes people got through your medical training and still. No. Remember, they didn't know not even half as much as your modern doctors know. 3 classes. In a suit, clipboard, watch in an amphitheater. You haven't touched them. Pass your test. Off you go. Get some doctor to take you on as an apprentice just before the Civil War. Very few regulations at all in America. and off you go. That doctor can say, 6 months, you're ready to go. 6 years, you're ready to go. The Army started, both sides started finding out, what's going on here? This guy from Ohio, he's pretty good. One for Illinois, he's terrible. Yeah. Train was didn't have to be, no laws. That changed. We all don't like regulations, but sometimes, at least originally, there was a reason for it. Yeah. So they from the medical training, anatomy and physiology, they knew where this stuff was. They could be trained quite quickly, research. As a matter of fact, since most of them, the armies were short medical trained people, they would hire temporary.
Oh my God.
It wasn't our fault. You should camp overnight here. For weekends, we'd be out there with our little campfires, our tents and everything, and the gangs would drive by in their car. No one bothered us because they didn't know we had blanks. They didn't know that. So they see we've got these big guns. Jesus, we be hunting elephants. And it's got this saber-like thing on the end. I'm just staying away from this. We were dog meat. So tease this out, tie them off, and you might be able to see the little string tied around there. If there was pus involved, like it's infected, which quite often it would be, first year of the Civil War, there's no ambulance corps either side. No ambulance corps. Your buddy brings you back. With your buddy shot. Hopefully your older brother is part of that same group. The two of you get back. That's no way to run an army. They changed that, and it made a big difference. We had ambulance corps. So, pack this wound. If it's clean, just sew it up. Then back to hospital with the doctor. You take some packing material, wet it, shove it in there, partially close this up and send them back to the hospital to recuperate. Change this bandaging every 2 to 4 hours for the next several weeks. Keep closing it up. It's like a puncture wound. That's the heal from the bottom, inside, out. And it works pretty good. The death rate from a typical successful surgery like this was 50%. Not good.
Wow.
Medicine back then was like that. It was considered good treatment. Better than your husband or wife at home. They knew more than you. They didn't know enough. So basically, that's how amputation went and why. The wound was too bad to fix. You just didn't cut it off. The art and professional artificial limbs took off in the Civil War. Prior to that, wasn't much. You sent back, no benefits. And family took care of it. If you didn't have any, you're going to starve it. So, any questions about medicine? How much better or worse than the medical plan? But I've got a question for you. You're in the Army. You get injured. How do you find the hospital? It's a tent. Just like the other 500 tons of hospital.
Does it mark anything? Or?
Go back to the Romans and Greeks. Red material, whatever. Like red, something for the tent or on a clothes bag. That's a homie back from. Didn't work.
Carolina,
Civil War. You ever been to a Civil War reenactment where they shoot cannons? They use what's called black powder. It's very dirty. This doesn't burn as fast as the smoke, they said normally in a battle after 10 minutes of both sides barraging each other.
So you know.
So it was no wonder you can get a bunch of.
And then and I didn't know.
Soldiers marching a line and it looked like that's terrible.
I was like,
going right into the whole gun.
Yeah, but it was.
You didn't know where. As an infantry,
and it's like.
Thank you for
You could have been right beside you.
Just like you went and said, this thing had a complete toolkit that went with it. If you had anything with the brain or the skull. So it just made a hole. Then you had a scalpel pull the plug out, you go in there, and they have prying tools. There's usually, if you had a partially crushed skull, you're dead. But not always. So you go in there, you'd have the tools to pry everything back out. You just make a cross incision, peel back everything, the skin and the hair, and that's the only thing that had any nerve in it.
That's what I've been told. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Otherwise, they can't feel any of this.
so they wouldn't be able to feel anything after that.
After that, the bone itself, the brain itself, there's no feelings to it. Boy, there's feelings at the nerve endings all over our body, though. We've got plenty of our teeth. Oh boy, yeah.
Of course.
So that's what this goes through, and I also show. Notice the bullet hole. Okay, this is a little smaller than it actually was in the skull. Lincoln got shirty.
E-R-N-I.
Yes.
The classic spelling.
Yes.
Okay. We got some of the same letters here.
Two rollers. What was the typewriter? No, it's before the typewriter.
This was before the typewriter. I don't think they were doing that when they, you know, when they.
After this, there came
Like a linotype where they have an actual keyboard and you type out. For petroleum, you see, it was the whale was the deal. There's a hot lead next to it. The hot lead would create what you're typing into like a little slug. Hot lead that would make a few words.
So you have basically molds made out of brass that you would drop down through the typing system, and then they would be injected from the reservoir and melted lead. And then you would print from it, and when you were done, you would wipe it down and melt it back down.
And that was after this.
Would you like your name?
Yes, please.
What's your name?
Scott?
Okay, cool. That's my dad's name. And we've had another Scott today. A good name. S-C-O-T-T?
Yes.
Excellent. Just wiping it back down. Okay. We've got the S. There's my S-C-O-T-T. There you are.
How'd you get into this?
I actually studied printing in college.
Okay.
And then Britt got me into this operation.
It's looking really good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe you. I'm just laughing because I'm like, that's wild.
to Shiloh or somewhere where I was hired. I had the fools fired on my order. But this pig cement poured in the air.
Drill only, load. You see what's happening.
He said bang is a joke. They'll run it, and I still won't be ready for it. Put your ears in because he's gonna run. See him sighting the gun.
Pardon.
That's right, we went across the street to that.
How's it going?
How's it going?
Well, and yourself?
You having a nice time?
I am. It was a lot of fun.
Do you know what this is? It's the encampment for an infantryman during the war.
Okay.
So infantry, you probably learned about the other branches: the artillery with the red piping, cavalry with yellow piping, and we would have had blue piping. I don't have any piping on me, which is the little lines you see on our cuffs and all that. And we would have been the predominant number of members of the army. We would have been either regulars, which is like the standard army, and volunteers. The volunteers are basically what it sounds like. It's these people that lived in their towns and their cities, and when the call to arms came up, they volunteered to serve, and they were big things like blacksmiths and teachers, and these were relatively untrained individuals in the military arts, but they caught them up hopefully, and they served.
Hopefully.
And they would serve far away from home. Many of these men died very far from home and very far from home. But the average encampment was like this. They actually spent a lot of time camping and marching more than actually fighting. And so they entertained themselves with things like reading the paper if they could read. If they could write, they would write, or they could have a friend to dictate to them. They would play cards, or play dice games. But gambling wasn't seen in the most positive light. And so this is something that was frowned upon by a lot of leadership, but they still did it to pass the time. Even there's some instances of men having lice races and get the lice out and actually race their lice. But in between that, they would also eat, and one of the common things that they ate would be hardtack. You probably heard of hardtack?
Yeah.
you want to touch it. Look how hard it is. It could serve as ammo. I'm sure at some point someone threw it at somebody and caused harm. But this stuff was so hard you couldn't eat it outright. It would break your teeth, so they would soak it in, boil it in coffee or water, pork fat, and
what is it?
It's flour and just water and some salt, and it's really, really dry. It was made by the National Biscuit Company, which now we call Nabisco. And so these were made in mass, and they can last forever. I mean, these things can last. There's some museums that are still around. But they would boil them, and the weevils and all the insects would float to the top, and they'd scrape them off and throw them out. They'd also get pork fat, which is basically, imagine a slab of pork meat with a lot of fat. So pork meat and salt pork, I'm sorry, they should call it salt pork. And then they would have baseball, the precursor of baseball, like rounders or versions of it. And they would just, play that. They would have races. At this particular fort, at this particular barracks, there was instances of members of different units racing against each other. So they did a lot of things for fun. But 2/3 of the guys actually, because they were new from towns and small villages, they weren't exposed to a lot of diseases from bigger towns. So a lot of them would die from dysentery. They would have outbreaks of smallpox.
In the camp?
Measles. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, dysentery was a big one. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the men, 2/3 of the men that died during the Civil War died of disease.
Wow. I had no idea.
Yeah, and as scary as the artillery sounds, not as many men died from artillery than they did from disease or even infantry battles with muskets. And this is the musket here. They would have been. This is the standard. These are standard muskets, right? There's Enfields and Springfields. Enfields were made in England, Springfields in America, and they would be 3 bands. They would be rifled, which means that they had the groove imparting the grooves inside imparting a spin to make them more accurate. A man could load and fire. Now this is called muzzle loading. They would load it from the front. An ordnance. These kinds would have loaded, for example, what's called a Minier ball, which looks like a little torpedo. You've probably seen it. Made out of lead. A proficient man could load and fire 3 times in 3 rounds a minute. But the caveat is, if you see this is metal. This gets hot.
Oh, on the top there. Oh, yeah.
See, it gets hot, and so that's not really a great thing over time. Also, these weapons can get fouled after being fired several times. Fouled means the black powder got gunked up in there and all that. So the bullet wouldn't be able to go down, and eventually it might even get stuck. There are instances of someone actually firing up to, because of either accident or whatever, not paying attention, 2 to 3 bullets at a time being fired at times as well. That's in the fog of war, the heat of war. So the fouling plus the chaos, they're 3 times a minute, approximately. Right?
Average, yeah.
But they were trained on how to use this, but interestingly enough, they were never trained on how to fire it. The upper command thought that bullets were too expensive, and so they wouldn't actually...
so there was no practice?
Nope, they just point and fire, that's it. And then the first time they would actually fire would be during the battle. And seeing the battle for the first time was called seeing the elephant. It's an old expression, I forget from where, but when they first saw the elephant, a lot of times that first time they even fired. So it was a big issue with a lot of men, because the way the tactics were taught, they were Napoleonic. And so Napoleonic tactics relied on smoothbore and other types of, flintlock and all that. They fired differently, right? Especially the smoothbores. They weren't as accurate. They didn't go as far. And so there they would line up man to man, side by side. So I guess the idea of not training them is probably because these weapons weren't considered accurate, which is not true. Smoothbores actually were more accurate than people give them credit. There's a whole talk about rifles being more accurate. Not really. At a closer distance, when they used what's called buck and ball, that was just as effective at a shorter distance.
What distance are we talking?
Oh, I don't know, 60, 50 yards about. Buck and ball would be pretty accurate. Smooth buck and ball would be accurate about 50, 60 yards. Maybe even 100.
50 yards. That's why they would mass the infantry, because you fired hoping you'd hit something. Yeah. The ball would come out.
Oh my God!
Kind of a zigzag.
That's why they probably felt like it wasn't necessary to train them. Oh, speaking of blue piping, we're moving about blue piping for the
okay.
But the tactics were Napoleonic, but the technology was advanced. And so you see these people with these old techniques facing new weapons. And so that's why you saw 600,000, an estimate goes to 750,000 men that died.
750,000
died during the war. Yeah, so, and again, not all of them from wounds, many of them from disease, but still.
And hardtack.
And hardtack, gosh, good Lord. Yeah, no kidding. But but this is one of the weapons that they would actually use. And it was very common for them to, like I said, get messed up. So and the cavalry, if you had a cavalry,
I did that.
Carbines,
Yeah.
That you couldn't carry something like this if you're on a horse, because to load it. I'm not supposed to touch another man's weapon. You're supposed to go out there, put the. You'd have to have 2 opposing teeth. The standards were minimal. You'd have 2 opposing teeth to tear the ammo, right? And it was loaded in such a way where now we have the primer and the powder and the ordnance, all of the bullet, all in one thing. We take that, the casing. But back then, it was you would put a cap here, a primer cap here, and you would that would be what would turn on the black powder or ignite it. The bullet itself was the bullet and the black powder in one, wrapped around a cloth or paper wrapper. You jam the whole thing down using the rammer. So you put it in there, ram it with a rammer, put the rammer away, and fire, and then do it again, right? And so that was always, and that's the iterate. But again, that's not something that's going to happen, right? With panic and fog of war.
Right.
But that's what these men had to do.
When you put like 2 in there by accident, would it still fire, or would it jam? It would still.
Sometimes it would jam, sometimes it would fire.
Okay.
We talk about sometimes even in panic. Sometimes guys would actually fire their rammers. There's a really cool image of a rammer in a tree. You've seen that one? Yeah, there's a rammer in a tree that someone fired. And so
oh, really?
There's a lot of instances you hear.
Sometimes they find muskets on battlefields that be loaded all the way to the barrel. Yeah. Now if that
They just kept doing it nervously.
They're so anxious.
Wow.
Now if that had fired, it'd probably blow up.
Yeah.
Probably. And these again were the most common types, Enfield and Springfields. There's experimentation with other types. Some units even held on to the smooth bores later in the war. A lot of units actually enjoyed using their buck and ball, because the buck and ball is literally that. It's a ball with 3 pieces of shot, kind of like a shotgun.
Okay.
And those they found accurate, because one ball would hit you and the 3 little balls would do some damage. But some of them were asked to use this instead, and they worked up to it. Initially, the South was very good at this because a lot of them did hunting. But there were units in the North that did this. For example, there's the Buckeyes, right? The Pennsylvania units, right? Where they would show their prowess at using these arms by having a bucktail, the tail of a deer in their hat, and that's how they came to be known, the bucktail. So some of them were actually proficient in the use of weapons, but really a lot of them were from the South. Initially, the South had the balance of better horse riders and better weapons individuals, but then eventually the North caught up. Anything you want to add?
No, just that the North just outproduced the South. They could produce more weapons, more men. Grant knew the North had almost an endless supply of men, so he could take the chance of risking more casualties where the South could not, since they were so limited on manpower.
Yeah, eventually that's why it was considered almost a war of attrition.
Yeah.
In a way, it was almost inevitability, in hindsight. But at the time, it looked like they may have had a chance, because they were constantly trying to appeal to Europe to help them out, and that didn't work out after the Emancipation Proclamation. It was like the Europe really wasn't going to get involved.
Right.
But the average soldier, some did fight, for slavery eventually, but some of them fought just to preserve the Union. Some of them fought because that's what the people in the town were doing. Some out of bravery, some out of nationalism. It wasn't always the same thing, right? So
Right.
the Federals.
Right.
What was the lifespan, if you know? What was the average a soldier would make it?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
I know they said that the horses were like
6 months.
6 months, and the horse is gone. That's the average.
The horse or the horseman?
The horse. Horse was 6 months.
I know that over 1 million horses and donkeys.
Yeah, that's what I said, yeah.
For a soldier, I really don't know what the average lifespan is for a soldier.
Yeah.
I mean, overall, so I will say that overall...
Okay, I'm going to ask you that next year. You better know.
I know, right? Well, also it was based on regiment by regiment. So, for example, take the 1st Minnesota at Gettysburg. What is it? Like 80-something% of them died at Gettysburg.
It was an incredible.
It was an amount, yeah. Or like take again Gettysburg, take North Carolina, right? The Iverson's men. A significant number of them died there. Whereas others, like here, the California units, because they were out here in very little fighting, some of them died of disease.
Why were they out here? Why was there barracks here?
Because Southern California was very pro-Confederate. They wanted to secede and join the Confederacy, and the Confederacy knew that. The Confederacy had sent an army out from Texas, and their job, they were going to capture the Southwest, and especially Southern California. They also wanted the gold. I'm good. Thank you. How was it?
Got to fire the cannon, Alonzo Cushing, eat your heart out.
They wanted the gold also, so Lincoln had ordered that this be built here. And
Okay.
the job of the soldiers at the drum barracks, it was a training depot actually, for soldiers, volunteers from California during the war. 16,000 Californians volunteered, 8,000 came through here. But their main job was to police the area and keep Southern California in the Union. They did go out, the California column, a couple of thousand, did the march, starting from here to the southwest. They fought a little battle outside of Tucson, Picacho Pass, which was a Union victory. The Confederates turned around and went back into Texas. And
Was that the westernmost battle?
That was the westernmost battle.
I had no idea, and I'm from California. Wow.
And some of the soldiers that were from here went all the way into Texas.
Okay.
But no, this was here because Southern California was very pro-Confederate.
How many barracks were there in California? Do you know?
Well, we had one barracks, and then we had initially, we had an armory in downtown, what is now 3rd and Main. And if you've heard of Winfield Hancock, he's the sort of the big heroes of Gettysburg. All right. And there's actually an exhibit on him. He had a one-room armory, federal armory, in downtown Los Angeles. After the Civil War, he was very worried that it was going to be raided, and he had heard rumors that it was actually going to be attacked. It's kind of a cool story. He gets his wife and his friends to barricade, and his wife, pregnant, is like carrying a gun. Just like, so anyway, the idea is that she's going to be attacked. Never happens, but he's so freaked out that he writes to his uppers and says, "Hey, let's get some protection here." So the guys from Fort Tejon. Now Fort Tejon, if you've been there, it's off the Grapevine.
Yeah.
Right. So that was a lot of dragoons, a lot of men were stationed there, and so they moved down here to downtown LA, which is they raised something called Camp Fitzgerald, and that was to make a presence known. But Banning and other people were worried about also the ports being raided by the Confederates, because the Anaconda Plan had been working really well in the east. Anaconda Plan was a way of choking the southern ports, so they couldn't get in imports and exports, right? So all the cotton they grew, they couldn't do anything with it, and they couldn't get things in. And so it was working really well. So they wanted the gold, and they also wanted the ports. And so Banning and Wilson said, they have a lot of business in this area. They're like, can you help protect the ports? So they moved the soldiers first down to Camp Latham over in what is now Culver City. It's not far from Fox Hills. There's actually a plaque there. And then eventually they moved down here to protect the water. And this is actually just a camp, and then it became the Drum Barracks.
Okay.
And so, to your question, there were many instances, but they migrated. And once it moved, that was closed down.
Oh, okay.
Right. So we did have, sequentially, I think like 5, but then ultimately 1 at a time at each time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is the big one. And then from then on, we would then spread eastward to other forts out in Arizona and in the desert. We had a small branch out by the water. As a matter of fact, the picture with the camel is not technically here. It's at a satellite site by the water. So technically is part of this, but it's there.
It was the warehouses for the Drum Barracks.
That's right.
The old Drum Barracks also had men on Catalina Island.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the only artillery from the Drum Barracks was out on Catalina Island.
It's just
to guard against possible Confederate invasion by sea.
And the barracks standing there, if you've been there, is the yacht club.
Really?
The building is still there.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And then from there you have another building. Have you been to our stone armory?
Yeah,
No.
Powder magazine is still there.
It's a few blocks away. Where is it?
Yeah, you go to the end of the street, make a left, and you'll run right into it.
What is it now? Just a building?
The guy that owns it won't sell it to us.
Oh, okay.
They're being a jerk. He'll sell it to you expensive. Yeah.
You can look at it, but you can't go.
And he's not taking care of it. It's an amazing piece of California history. He owns it. He's not selling it. He wants to sell it to us for a ridiculous price. I can forget how much Terry tells us. And so meanwhile, it's just sitting there going to waste. It's really awful. But check it out. It's really cool.
I'll go in there
This is the
next.
last wooden building. That's the last stone building. It's really cool. Because the sides were made out of stone, and the top was made out of like tiles and bricks. The idea being that if it blew up, it would blow up and not out.
Oh, okay.
Which makes sense.
Well, cool. Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah,
Appreciate
no
it.
problem. Yeah.
So what I did was I just put it in a safe in my closet and didn't say anything to him from the graduation.
What's this?
That's a
This is a magic lantern. It's the first form of cinema. So the lanternists will travel town to town giving shows with projected images. So here's the Grimaldi, the clown. It's too bright out here to give shows, but I can give you a sense of what they were like. This here is what we call a slip side. You can see there's a girl here, and she's got a little badminton, and she's hitting it up in the air. So it's the first animation.
Oh, wow.
And the way that works is through two pieces of glass. One piece of glass stays still and the other moves, and it changes what you could see.
That is very impressive.
So the...
Now, would they tell a story with this, or they just change? Okay.
Yeah. So for example, let's do a little story with this one here. Here's Sally. She's in her fanciest clothes today. She's come here, and Sally's job here is to jump rope. So we're gonna help Sally a little. We're gonna say 1, 2, 3, and Sally's gonna jump. So 1, 2, 3, and jump. 1, 2, 3, and jump. 1, 2, 3, and jump. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It's Sally.
I bet this blew their minds doing this. All this.
Completely blew her minds. Now, Sally's not the only one in her family who can jump rope. We also have Sally's father. Look at Sally's father. He's here jumping rope. Look at him. He's amazing. He's the world's greatest jump roper. But not only is Sally amazing, not only is Sally's father amazing, we also have Sally's grandmother. That's right, Sally's grandmother. Yes, this is an entire jump roping family, but the oldest, the most experienced, the most well-known member of the entire family is Sally's great-great-grandfather. That's right. Look at him go. So,
wow.
So this would normally be projected, in a theater using a lantern.
Did you make these, or these are original?
These are all original.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is an original magic lantern show. So.
Now, do you find these all together, or you collect them individually?
A little bit of both. I'll get parts of shows. I'll get whole shows. Sometimes I have to take two different shows and put them together to make a show. So it kind of just depends on what I get, and then I just work with what I get.
And what got you into this?
I started out doing photography like the Bailey Denton's here, and I ended up picking up a few lanterns because I was going to use them with my camera, use the lenses with my camera. And then it was a pandemic, and I reached out to a guy named Terry Borton, who runs the American Magic Lantern Theater, and he was like, I can't do shows because of the pandemic. Says, you want me to teach you how to do shows? And this was my pandemic project.
Wow.
I was learning how to do
so recently
19th
then.
century magic lantern shows.
Excellent. And you travel and you do them?
Yeah, I travel around and do them.
Excellent.
Or come to events. It kind of depends on the event. So I'll do both like paid shows for paid audiences, just little things like this, just kind of, public outreach. So.
Well, cool. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Yes, very good. Yeah, very good. And so if you want to try this out, see, these are the letters that make up the word. So the first one is dash, dot, dash, dot. So can you find that one on here? This is the same one over here, so if you want it, so we need a dash, a dot, and a dash, and a dot.
If you have any ancestors that fought
one of the reasons he got promoted to Allied Supreme Commander is that one of his jobs after World War I is
those pieces that you see on the field over there, those are their pieces. Then my good friend Ken here is working the Blacksmith wagon.
Oh, sure. I just like to say that.
This is a little slower than your digital camera.
A little slower.
Just a bit.
But you can do the same kind of tricks you do on the panorama.
Now move over there.
Try the rest of it.
You gotta hold real still, man.
What a great time. A lot to see, a lot to do. If you're in Wilmington, California, check out the Drum Corps Museum. I'll put the link in the description. Until next time, I'll see you where the road takes us.